Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our today's virtual talk. My name is Richard Kipngeno. I'm the Budding and Membership Officer here at Nature Kenya, and it is indeed my humble pleasure to welcome all of you virtually as our speaker today, Francis Kagema, takes us through our virtual talk entitled Mangroves for Biodiversity and People. Today being the International Day for the Conservation of Mangrove Ecosystem, we felt that it would really be ideal if we could have such a discussion about mangroves ecosystem. And we are glad that our very own Francis Kagema volunteered to take us through. And he will be doing this presentation from the home of mangroves down in the coastal region of Kenya. To be precise, as he said, he is in Mombasa currently. So I will just request everyone to remain muted so that we give the speaker ample time to go through the presentation. And if you have any question, any concern, you can meanwhile raise them through the chat box, and we will strive our level best to go through all of them after the presentation. And also to let you know that this presentation is being recorded, and after we will upload it in our Nature Kenya YouTube channel, where you can revisit and watch if you would wish to. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to welcome on stage our today's speaker, Francis Kagema, to take us through. Welcome, Kagema.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As Richard has said, yes, today is the International Day of Celebration of Conservation of Mangroves globally. And our national event is happening right now somewhere in Kwale, near Vanga. There's some event there. Yesterday, I attended the build-up. We had some dialogue, discussion about our mangroves and the global scenario in terms of mangroves. My name is Francis Kagema, as Richard has said, and I think I'm good to go. And right now I'm seated at Mamagena Drive, just next to the Indian Ocean. I wish I could turn my camera, and you see how beautiful it is now, very sunny and green. After years and years of drought, the coast looks great. For those of you who've not been here recently, you can come and pay us a visit. Now let's get to talking about our mangroves. Next slide. Yeah, now when we talk about mangroves, what are we talking about? We are talking about tropical trees that are growing in the intertidal area between the low and the high tide, in the oceans, in the tropics and subtropic all over the world. And we have several species of that, of mangroves. Some are shrubs, some are big trees. And all of these trees are adapted to growing in a saline environment. And they only grow where there is a mixture of fresh water and saline water from the ocean. You find that in the creeks, in the river mouths and deltas, and we have some in Kenya. I'm going to talk about that later. These trees, how do they manage to survive in this kind of environment? Because they have specialized structures, and the way they are, the way they function is able to excrete excess salts that they absorb from the system. I'm blocked by the person coming in, sorry. And the entire system of mangrove, every species is adapted to surviving in this, and the way they reproduce, the kind of seeds they produce. We are going to look at seeds later on, and they adapted to germinating and establishing themselves in that kind of environment. Worldwide, we have 60 species of mangroves, and in Kenya, we have 9 of them. Some are dominant, some are occur in few numbers, in a few areas, and all of them contribute one way or the other to the ecosystem, and to the biodiversity, as I'm going to describe as we move forward. Next. Looking at that picture, you can see this is a picture, I think, taken from the Tana Delta. We have a vast area of mangrove within the delta, especially the lower side. And we have quite some mangroves, sorry? Yeah, we have mangroves in the Tana. We have in every of the 5 counties that we have in the coastal, that neighbor the Indian Ocean, from Kwale to Mombasa, where I am, Kilifi, Tana River, and Lamu. You're going to see the statistics later. Next. Before we come back home, let's look at what is happening globally and as far as mangrove ecosystem and forests are concerned. We have 136,000 square kilometers of mangroves globally, and that's just 0.01% of all forest cover. And these mangroves, though the coverage is not so much, they protect more than 18 million. Sorry for the noise, a motorcycle is passing by. More than 18 million people are protected in wherever they are settled in the tropics and subtropical area by these mangroves. They are the most cost-effective risk management in as far as beach and shore protection is concerned. We know recently we've had controversies of development and people building sea walls and all types of structures to protect against the rising sea level with the current climate change. To deal with that, the easier way is to grow mangroves, although they don't grow everywhere. So these mangroves I've just talked about, their estimated value, ecosystem services, and all other services they provide, they are valued at $194,000 per hectare. That value is average. Some areas higher, some areas lower. And annually, all over the world, the mangrove forests are valued at 2.7 trillion shillings from the ecosystem services they provide, the goods, the cultural aspects, and the fisheries and all those things put together. So 1 hectare of mangrove, now this is very important, can sequester 1,100 tons of carbon annually, and most of the carbon in the mangrove, unlike the terrestrial forest, is stored underground. And mangroves sequester or sink 10 times more carbon than terrestrial forests. Although we have less of mangroves, the rate of absorption of carbon is much, much higher as compared to the terrestrial forests globally. And each hectare of mangrove drops litter, especially leaves, about 3 tons. And that litter builds up the mud in the mangrove areas that also helps more mangrove to grow. Globally, we are losing about 0.2% of the forest, of the mangrove forest. And this is many things are driving that we are going to talk about later on. And mangrove forests, although they constitute so small fraction of all the forests, they are 4 times more vulnerable and threatened, mainly by human development, harvesting, and now we are having issues with climate change and drought and so on and so forth. Now you can see that mangrove ecosystem is seriously in danger, but something can be done about it. We are going to see that later. Next. What is the legal status of our mangrove forest in Kenya? They were declared long time ago, in 1932, as forest reserves. That is before independence. And we have stood by that, but I think we should redeclare that. because we have new mangrove areas which are contested. Like there were no mangrove years back, now there is mangrove. Was that included in the gazettement of 1932? There are question marks that can be contested even in court. So maybe the government need to redeclare every mangrove area with a map that these areas are forest reserves. And that is the area between the high and low tides. And this also is contested because some areas we have a creation of land, the sea is receding, developing new area, new land, and then some areas the sea is eroding and moving landwards. So there's contest there. So which is the high water mark? What if it moves either way? What happens to that? Maybe we need some policy statement on that. And sorry, somebody is saying something? Okay, Kenya Forest Service is responsible for management of mangroves in area, sometimes in collaboration with KWS, where those areas are also marine reserves, like Mida Creek. And there are also issues come as a result of that double gazettement as forest reserve and also as marine reserve. Some mangrove areas are also recognized as Samana Biosphere Reserve. One of these is Mida Creek, which is part of the Malindi, Watamu, Arabuko, Sokoke, Man and Biosphere Reserve. So maybe moving forward, other areas will get other types of recognition. Next. So let's look at where our mangroves are in Kenya. The official figure, we have 61,000 hectares of mangroves in Kenya. And that represents 3% of all our forests in Kenya. And you can see that Lamu has the lion's share of the mangrove area with the 61%. And then Kilifi and Kwale more or less the same. More or less, Mombasa and Tana River have the same. Oh, the screen has disappeared from my head, sorry. And Kenyan coastline is 670 kilometers from Kwale, Vanga, all the way to Kiunga, the Somali border. If this map was to be made bigger, then you'll see that mangroves are in very few places. Most of the beachfront is either sandy beaches or rocky cliffs, and those ones are unsuitable for mangroves. And then you'll also see a pattern. Wherever there is a river or a stream, or then you see mangrove. And most creeks have mangroves because of the addition of fresh water from our inland. So that is how our mangrove is distributed. And Lamu County, having the lion's share, is the only county where there are licenses for harvesting mangroves. I don't know what impact that has. Maybe we'll discuss that later on. Next. So if you look at the zonation, there are mangroves. If you look at the image below there, you can see coconut trees on the far left. And then you'll see that the mangroves have zones. And those zones depends on the depth of water, the substrate, and even the concentration of water in terms of salt, because when the tide is low, there's a lot of evaporation and the salinity goes high. There are some species which cannot withstand that. And because of that, our 9 species in Kenya are distributed. Sometimes there's a mixture of species in one place. And what I've seen, especially in most areas with mangrove, Avicennia marina is the outermost. This is a typical image where Heritaria, which is absent in most of the creeks. I have only seen Heritaria in Tana Delta. Most of the other places, we don't have that species. But we do have Avicennia marina almost everywhere. It's a very hardy species. And then you can see others. There's a mixture of Cereops, Tagal, Rhizophora, the mangrove that we know as poles. Most of the places you see on sale is Rhizophora mucronata, and also Bruguiera sometimes is used as poles. And then the other deeper species, Sonelechia alba, those are they are deeper and also sometimes produce straight poles. So you see that like two species occupy 70% of our forests. That is Rhizophora mucronata, which is also called mukoko in Kiswahili, and Syriopstagal mukada. The two combined are covering over 70% of the mangrove. So although we have 9 species, then the other 7 species are sharing 30%. Some species are extremely rare. Some you find only 1 tree, and some places you find 2 or 3 here and there. And the dominant ones are like 4 or 5. Let's move to the next slide. So at the beginning, I mentioned about specialized adaptation of mangroves. On the extreme right, there's an image there. What we find there, they are called figure roots that emerge where we have Rhizophora mangrove. Those kind of roots there are breathing roots for this species. So they are able to absorb oxygen. I mean, oxygen or carbon dioxide, depending on the time of the day. And also because of the spread, you can see the tree is far away and the roots are everywhere. They help to hold the soil because of that nature of those root system. In the middle is another system of roots, which is different, called knee roots. And then on the extreme right, we have the aerial roots that appear mainly in Rhizophora species. And these roots are important not only for the mangrove themselves, but also for the environment because of the fibrous, there are so many of them, they're covering a wide area and they're holding the soil. And that's how we get the beach protection from the mangroves that we are going to talk about later on, holding the soil, the substrate, and even keeping the area stable. Let's move to the next slide. Types of mangrove seeds are also specialized, and all of them can germinate when they are still wet, because they grow, they fall in the mud, they don't have to dry. You know, some species of trees, the seeds need to dry up and then be planted. But for mangroves, the seeds will germinate when they are still soft. On the extreme left is Rhizophora seeds, which we also call propagales. And looking at that shape, they have a sharp end, and the top side, it grows the way it is produced. If it falls, it is going to go through into the mud and germinate. The top becomes the shoot, the bottom becomes the root. The next one there is Bulgaria, and also have similar roots. I mean, seeds, shorter propagales, but they germinate the same way. At the middle is Abyssinia seeds. They are round, they can float in the water, but they will still germinate. The minute they get contact to the mud, they germinate. The final one, the big type of seeds, this is uncommon, is from Xyrocarpus, and also adopted still to germinate. Xyrocarpus is not a very common species of mangrove. These kind of seeds, because of their nature, they will germinate and hold quickly, because the tides will come, the water will come, and the water will go again. The environment is never stable. And because of that, the seeds are adopted to grow in such an environment. Well, with the ever rising sea level, the tide level might be too much, and the waves that are coming too much, they wash most of the seeds back into the ocean, and that of course interferes with the natural regeneration of mangroves. And that is why sometimes we need to help the regeneration by a human intervention. Next. So what is the value of mangroves? The value of mangroves vary from ecosystem to human, to culture, and to many others. Of course, mangroves provide ecosystem goods and services that are of economic value, ecological value, and also environmental value. The total economic value of mangroves in Kenya is estimated to be 269 thousand shillings per hectare, which is lower. Remember, we talked about the global values. The Kenyan value seems to be a little lower. And why is that so? Because most of our areas are not vulnerable to extreme flooding, like some islands in the Caribbean and other places where mangroves provide that service. Despite all that, we still get some good value for the mangroves per hectare. So what are these values? We have the provisioning role or provisioning ecosystem services. We can harvest mangroves. I've already talked about the harvesting of mangroves in Lamu, building poles. This used to be the traditional way of building Swahili houses. And mangroves would be used, and they are still used a lot. And we also have the fisheries, which is non-wood now, and some local medicine, and probably many others in that category. We have the regulatory ecosystem services, including shoreline protection, carbon sequestration in this time of climate change. We cannot emphasize that enough. And also the absorbed pollutants. We know most of our rivers are taking a lot of pollutants from their sources, like Sabaki River, a lot of pollutants from even Nairobi, the sewage, the agricultural areas. When they go through mangroves, there's a bit of filtration of those, and probably when the water gets to the ocean is a little better. Sediments, this is critical. With the kind of poor land use upcountry, rivers are coming down with tons and tons and tons of sediments and silt into the ocean, which now goes into the corals and kill the corals and other things. The ocean does not need mud. Mud is our soils, which we should keep up country to grow crops and vegetation and do all sorts of things. The ocean doesn't need that. So the mangrove will help to filter that as the water goes down. And then we have supporting services, ecosystem services, the nutrient cycling. Of course, the mangroves are plants. They absorb all nutrients from the ground and put them into the system. There are a lot of organisms that feed on mangrove litter, including crabs and other organisms in the ocean. As a part of the primary production, of course, this other one is very important. The mangroves are habitat for several other organisms, including breeding sites for fish and things like that. So the lists can grow depending on where. It can increase or decrease depending on where you are. And then finally, we have the cultural services. We have a few sacred sites in the mangrove areas, including like Munarani heritage site is a museum at Kilifi. There are mangroves there. Of course, we have the education and the research. These days, everyone wants to know a little bit about the blue area, the blue economy, the blue carbon, the blue everything. And that is related to the mangroves and the ocean. Tourism, this is key. Tourism is one of the many ways that communities are generating income from mangrove areas. We have examples like Nida Creek. We have at least 3 or 4 groups that are entirely dependent on ecotourism group of like 40 people, and they are self-employed and making some living out of that. And that also is attached to recreation services that the mangrove provide. And the beauty of mangroves is attractive. And of course, the mangroves are not deciduous, they don't shed leaves. So if you can have a boardwalk across mangroves, we have several of those. Of course, it is going to be shaded throughout the year, and the environment is very good. Next slide. So this one now, we are looking at all those things that are all biodiversity in the mangrove ecosystem together in one shot. Support biodiversity. Trying to call me, I'm using my phone. I hope is my sound back, Richard? Richard?
Yes,
Richard?
Kagema. Yes, Kagema, we can hear you.
Yeah, go back to that image. Somebody is coming.
Yeah.
I can see a different slide. Yeah, okay, there.
Yeah, that's all fine.
So when you look at, the variety of organisms, from microorganisms to insects, to crustaceans, to crabs, to fish, and then to the birds, the kingfishers that live in the mangrove areas, the migrant species that forage on the mud flats in many areas like Meadow Creek, the crab rovers, and all the others that come and go. All those are dependent on the mangrove. The mud, mainly from the fallen leaves of mangroves, accumulated over thousands of years, provide habitat for several different species. The young for fish, the mollusks, and all this. Sometimes we find mammals like colobus monkeys in Tanzania. And Zanzibar, it's hard away from calling. Yeah. So that is it. And then if you look at the mangroves, the materials they provide, I have not talked about firewood. Most of the people here in Mombasa, in the slum area surrounding the mangroves, get firewood from mangroves. And firewood is a critical requirement because people can't eat raw food. And this particular one, firewood, is a driver of degradation of mangrove areas, especially here in urban areas where they are urban areas. And unfortunately, mangroves occur where the densities of people are high. So the demand for various materials is always high in the mangrove areas. So that summarizes a lot of the other things I've talked about: the economic benefits, the climate regulation, the absorption of carbon dioxide, and the issues of greenhouse gas absorption in sequestration, and all those together. Next one. Next slide. Now, these communities living next to the mangrove areas, what are they doing, or what are they getting from the mangroves? In Lamu, I said at the beginning, we have licenses for cutting mangroves. I cannot be sure that that was a good decision because the local community argued that it is our tradition, it's our culture to harvest mangrove, we do it sustainably. I've sat in forums where these arguments have been fronted. But I believe today the traditional way of using mangroves have long changed. We have commercial harvesting. Those people who want the license are not doing that for their own subsistence needs. They want the license for commercial need, and there is no aid to the commercial demand. So there is this question. We have, yes, 61% of all mangroves in Lamu, but all the other areas, they are mangroves, but they are not licensed. That brings an issue. Why allow one place and leave the other? Maybe if I was asked, I would say we stop all places, and because the degradation is extremely high. Beekeeping. Beekeeping is not widespread in mangrove areas, but mangrove areas can be good for beekeeping. Why? Because there is no changes in weather in terms of rainfall and shortage of water that causes bees to abscond in other areas. So mangrove areas can be important for keeping bees and production of honey. And the honey from mangrove is very dark and has some taste of salt, and it is said to be medicinal. That needs to be proven. We have mariculture. This is an area that has not developed well. There are a lot of issues. Whether we can do mariculture, grow crabs, do some fish species in ponds that have been dug in mangrove areas. And that one needs to be explored further, because those fishermen who do their work in the mangrove are complaining that these days there are no fish in the creeks, in the channels, in the mangrove areas. So maybe it's time to intervene and find another way of growing fish in the mangrove areas, partially in an artificial system, because of the declining numbers of fish in the mangrove areas. And also the number of fishermen have been increased over time. And probably every year we have several thousand of new fishermen, and mostly doing shallow water fishing. Most do not have capacity to go into the deep sea. So they are all competing in the shallow waters, in the mangroves, in the beaches, in the shores of the ocean, and then depleting the resources there. How about ecotourism? Well, we have several community projects that generate income, but the challenge I've seen is few people are getting the benefits. And also we cannot make it open so that we can have hundreds of investments in ecotourism. So this is a challenge. So if other people see that a group is benefiting and they are not, and the resource belongs to everybody, of course that is a source of conflict. And that needs to be looked into. Communities are doing a lot of restoration. We have a lot of organizations uh, coming into the space, doing restoration, and being able to fundraise nationally and internationally, and being able to go into the space for restoration. And when they do that, then like Mida Creek, I don't know how many organizations are doing restoration, planting mangrove everywhere, including where the mangroves should not be planted. And some just want to tick boxes. I promised my donor I'm going to plant 10,000 propagales or seedlings. I do that and tick the box, take photos, send back to the donor. The mangroves die almost immediately. They are planted in the wrong place, the wrong species, the wrong substrate, substratum. The soil or the ground is not suitable. Maybe they are sandy beaches, and all these things come together, and we are seeing a lot of confusion there and some wasted effort. Maybe Kenya Forest Service and others who have the expertise need to guide what happens where. Carbon funding. We have a project in Gazi in Kwale, where communities have done restoration in an area, and they're getting carbon credits for it, getting some money for that. And there are a lot of question marks whether that is a good project that others can emulate and start in other places. And the government, I have just received the carbon funding mechanism bill today. So there was no legal or policy arrangement on how communities can benefit, and the mangroves belong to the national government, and that space needs to be looked into better, because we said at the beginning that mangroves sequester carbon about 20 times higher than the terrestrial forest. That means the potential to generate income through carbon, then it's high. But there are issues there to be addressed at policy level, even at operational level. Fishing, of course, there's a lot of fishing. We have community forest associations that are active in the mangrove areas. There are about 10 or so community forest associations in mangrove areas. But then you find that there are also BMUs, which are operating at a different law. The mangroves are supposed to be managed under the Forest Act with the CFAs and Kenya Forest Service. Inside there, fisheries resource exploited by BMU members under a different act, which does not recognize the CFA. Then there is a bit of conflict there that needs to be looked into. And also I've already said that a lot of people are saying that there is very little fish these days in the mangrove areas, meaning the level of degradation is extremely high, the overfishing, and now a lot of fishermen are using mosquito nets to fish, catching the fingerlings, and of course that is going to destroy the whole thing moving forward into the future. Next slide. John, you can see the photos of a beehive there and so on. So what is driving the degradation of mangroves? Deforestation is one. 4 main factors. Aquaculture, I said, is an alternative thing we can do in the mangrove areas. The agriculture, especially upcountry, what comes down in rivers. Tourism sometimes is excessive. Urbanization. Oh, Mombasa. Yesterday I was in a meeting and we were told that Mombasa has lost about 40% of the mangrove that was there in 1992. And the space for restoration is there, but the quality of substrate for restoration has changed over time. So maybe we are not able to recover the mangroves that have been lost in the urban area in Mombasa. There are slums just next to mangrove areas in Chuda and several others in Likoni where I am. I can see Likoni across the channel because I'm at Mamagena Drive. And all these together, these are the demand for mangrove products far outstrips the sustainable levels of harvesting from the mangrove areas. And this is a risk which we need to address. And with the slums, the kind of structures, the buildings they make, the houses, those shanties, they use poles and they use iron sheets. And then what is the point of trying to buy poles when you can harvest them just next to you? And that is driving a lot of degradation. Urbanization also, there's pollution. A lot of sewage in Mombasa goes direct into the mangrove area. Of course, the fresh water is required, but not polluted fresh water. All these together puts a lot of pressure in urban mangrove areas, especially in the high density areas like Mombasa, where I am talking from. Next. You can see those now in figures there. Man-made man-made threats are higher, of course, from natural causes than natural causes. And you can see from 1985 to 2009, Kenya lost about 20% of its mangrove forest. The figures I presented earlier, I think dates back to early 2006 or 2007. Now we are told we have 57,000. In those 5-6 years, we have lost another 4-5% of the mangroves. And this trend is continuing. And losing about 450 hectares annually is not something that we can be proud of. In Kilifi, we have salt factories north of Malindi, in Magarini. Most of those salt farms are in mangrove areas, and sometimes they release high saline water, super saline water into the mangrove, and they destroy that. So areas, urban areas, I cannot emphasize that urban areas, the threat is much higher. And you can see Mombasa, it's estimated that we've lost around 80%. Oh, sorry, I had said 40%. This is a lot. And what is the opportunity for recovery? Probably extremely low. The nature of the community, the poverty levels drive that. If everybody was building permanent buildings, the demand for mangroves would obviously go lower. But now, with a big percentage of people in Kilifi, for example, 70% are poor, and a big proportion of those are absolute poor. Those people will have to survive on natural resources where they can find it, whether it's terrestrial or in mangrove areas. We can see the manifestation of that. Take him off, he tries again, and cut him off, he tries again. There is no end to his trials. Next slide now. Now, what is it that we can do to address the challenges of mangroves? I could say this, that we have sufficient legal mechanisms. We have the laws, we have the policies in some of the places, but the implementation of this has been a challenge. I've talked about the places where there is double gazettement. Is it KFS in charge or is it KWS? And sometimes the conflict between the two, who is the boss? So such things. Community stewardship, of course, is top. If communities are not in charge of the resources around them, then they become poachers. And it's very difficult to stop them. It's very difficult to stop them from poaching. So this is a real threat. The BMU, the CFAs, and I've already talked about which one is superior. Is it the CFA or the BMU or on these things? So with communities, there's a challenge of governance within themselves and these structures that are formed under different laws. If we empower the community organization to generate sustainable incomes from mangroves, of course, they respect the mangrove. They'll take care of the mangroves. And this is very, very important. In Middle Creek, where communities are getting good benefits, even if it's not everybody, those who are benefiting become also the security of the mangrove. They will report poachers, they will report anything that happens near where they are operating from. And they know without the mangrove, their benefits or their livelihood will be in danger. Constant awareness creation. We need this, especially in schools. Do children appreciate mangroves, or when they see mangroves, they see money, they see poles, they see charcoal, they see fuel wood, they see extractable resources. They don't know about climate change. They don't know about beach protection and shoreline protection. They don't know about any other thing. So we need to keep this information flowing into younger people, even into the older people who who do not know the reason for climate change. They see a lot of droughts lasting years and years, frequent droughts, long droughts. They don't know the reason why this is happening. And when they attach that to what is happening, the degradation, of course, they will think twice about destroying the mangrove and even other forests. Enforcement. This is an elephant in the room. You'll find poachers bribing all the way, from the police on the road to Kenya Forest Service officers to KWS officers. Everybody would rather get something from those who are degrading and take home and allow this degradation to continue. I don't know what is the solution for this. because it's part of our DNA to be corrupt. And alternative technologies. I have just talked about building. If we have a different technology that does not need poles, then pole cutting probably will go down. And pole cutting is like a cycle. It's a cyclic destruction. They cut poles, they build houses, they'll last a number of years. Those houses will collapse, and then they go back to the forest, cut again, build again. After some years, the buildings or the structures will collapse, then they go back again. It's a cycle of destruction, wasting of time and energy, and the forest is also suffering as a result. So what if we had a technology that does not need poles? Maybe interlocking blocks to build, uh, and this is important. And even firewood, fuel wood. I don't want to go deep into fuel wood, but I work in Kilifi County, and Kilifi County needs some millions of tons of firewood every year. What if they can use uh, improved technologies and cut down the amount of fuel wood that the communities need? And 99% of the rural communities are using firewood to cook. Where do they get the firewood from? Those near the mangroves will do that from the mangrove. Those near other terrestrial forests, the kaya forest, will get it from the kaya forest. And the volume, the biomass that is going into burning into firewood and ends up contributing to climate change is so much across the coastal region. And that goes beyond mangroves. It goes to other forests as well. Next. I think this is the end. Yeah, thank you so much. And that's the much I can say today. Of course, I believe there are questions, and I will try to answer those that I can at the moment. Thank you everyone for listening. It's your turn now to respond.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kagema, for such an insightful presentation about status of mangroves conservation in Kenya. So, ladies and gentlemen, I will open the ground for you, so that if you would like to ask a question, you can send it through the chat box, or so far no question, no comment has come through the chat box. Maybe you can raise your hand, then I'll give you the opportunity to ask. So the floor is yours. Hi, Margaret, how are you?
Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
Good afternoon.
So thank you. Oh yes, I keep forgetting.
Afternoon here. Afternoon here. You know, it's the morning in Canada.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much for a really, really interesting talk. And I after listening to it, I guess the bottom line is there's so much poverty in the areas that surround these mangrove forests that I'm not sure, what the suggestion is, because unless we address the poverty, then it becomes really an issue of putting food on their table versus food and shelter, really. So, Francis, I guess I hear the underlying question in your talk today, and it's so multi-level. It's almost overwhelming, but thank you for raising that question.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret. Kagema, you have something to respond to that?
Yeah, of course. And this is very frustrating, Margaret. Thank you for the question. That people will do something that will make them even more poor. By degradation, the risk of poverty increasing is, of course, higher. So it's time we talk even about our families. We used to talk a lot about family sizes and so on, and family planning before, but that talk ended some stage. I don't know why. Because with that level of poverty, of course, things are going to go the wrong way. And with the number of people who are poor increasing, and this is unfortunate, and this is my observation, I don't have data on this, that poor families tend to be bigger, and those who are better in their status tend to have smaller families. And alternative livelihood we can attempt. We have been able to prove by research that alternative livelihoods improve the condition of forests. We did that in Arabuko Sokoke forest before, and this is something that we need to continuously do. The other thing is, and this is possible, is people to grow their own trees in their farms. This is possible. And I can say that here, the culture of planting trees is not part of our culture, planting trees. We use trees a lot, but we don't plant trees. So it's time to change and start planting trees. Start looking inwards for the resources that we need. There are fast growing trees like one called Casuarina, which can be an alternative to the poles the mangrove provide. And it grows faster than mangroves. 4 years, 3 years, it's big enough to harvest for poles. So there are some quick alternatives. But also, it should be a policy, county government, national government, to bring technologies that are cheap, that people can build their houses using, so that we stop relying on natural resources and to cut this cycle. We need to break the cycle of building and collapsing and building and collapsing. Some actions can be done, maybe not solve everything, but can reduce the pressure. And now with the restoration that communities and NGOs and government is doing, probably we will reach an equilibrium, that the cutting is happening, but also we are restoring so much. And there's also improved enforcement, the community managing and monitoring their own forests. Then finally, probably we can get somewhere.
So if you're looking at where it has been successful, is there an area that you would pinpoint as being really, they're doing a good job, rather than, areas where donors are giving money to plant these trees, they don't really care where it goes and it's not being done properly?
Yeah, there are a few examples of good job. And I can point to both the Tana and Sabaki river mouths. Those two places, we are active there as Nature Kenya, but we are in partnership with several others, but the planting is more methodical, the right species, and because of also the inflow of fresh water, then the mangroves are doing extremely well. The problem that we have in those two areas, especially Sabaki river mouth, is the poaching, the cutting is still quite a lot. But there are trained community scouts that are doing patrols there. This morning I received a lot of photos from there, doing patrols. And for that patrol to be sustained, we need some income. And we have a project that we are coming up there, which will give them some income to keep them in the mangrove. Not many people, there are only 12 people, but once they're in the mangrove, then those who poach will reduce the number of instances where they poach successfully.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are welcome.
Thank you very much, Kagema, for the insightful feedback. From the chat box, we have 2 questions that have come through. And one is from Paul Buckley. Hi, Paul. And okay, Paul says, nice to hear you after a long time, Kagema. How much? Sorry. Lawrence, kindly mute. Okay, sorry for that hiccup. So Paul is saying, nice to hear you after a long time, Kagema. How much of the mangrove area currently has any active conservation intervention? And do you know if there is anything planned on the scale required?
Sorry, the last part?
Okay, the question
The
is,
last part of the question.
okay, how much of the mangrove area currently has any active conservation intervention? And do you know if there is anything planned on the scale required?
I can say maybe I'm not sure everywhere what is happening everywhere, but I've just come from Kwale, and there is almost every mangrove pocket in Kwale is active conservation group, either local group or an NGO, a national one or international one. In Kwale, Kilifi recently is entirely covered with conservation efforts in all the creeks in Kilifi. Mombasa is kills. Everybody avoids Mombasa because of the urban status of it. It's very hard to get something done. And Mombasa doesn't have a lot of mangroves. Tana Delta is entirely covered by Nature Kenya's projects, and a lot of work is happening there right now in Tana. Lamu, we have 60%, 61% of mangroves in Lamu, but that's a difficult place. You know, the security status, sorry, in Tana, in Lamu County, keeps everybody away. So there's very little, if anything, is happening in Lamu in terms of conservation. But the local community are claiming to do the harvesting the traditional way, and I doubt that because a lot of commercial harvesting is happening. So overall, there is a lot of efforts, but the output is something that we must wait and see how significant it's going to be. For example, Middle Creek, we have like 3 or 4 NGOs with doing restoration. I don't know whether KFS has been able to apportion each one of them a place and the right place, not planting where there used to be no mangrove and such things. And it's also very good to hear from you, Paul. After many years, I'm still here. Maybe I'll retire here, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I can see Elizabeth Nanga.
Thank you.
Elizabeth is saying something. You can read that for me because I'm using the phone.
No problem. I'm actually going through them in the order on which they came in. There's one from Rupi Mangat, and Rupi is asking, the ban on logging mangroves in Lamu, what was the outcome?
Hi, Rupi. Long time. I've not seen her for a long time. These days she doesn't come this way. But anyway, when the moratorium happened, the mangrove people in Lamu lobbied the president then. They went all the way to the head of state and lobbied so that the moratorium was removed from the mangrove. So they continued business as usual. But I believe there's significant damage as a result of that. They claim that we, Lamu people, have been cutting mangroves all our lives. And it's the only way we know how to live, which is not true. And they were allowed to continue cutting mangroves, and they are doing it large scale. I'm told now they're using power saws, chainsaws to cut mangroves. Traditionally, there used to be no chainsaws. And trucks are waiting out there, tens of trucks, and they get permits because now it's illegal. But who is monitoring what is happening in Lamu? I believe nobody. It's just giving licenses, and the cutting happens and continues. I think we need to go to Lamu and check wherever is accessible what has happened. Is the cutting they are claiming to be sustainable actually sustainable, or is just what we are calling these days hot air? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback. I see a comment from Peter Mureithi, my colleague from Nature Kenya. A good talk, Kagema. I have learned a lot that not only the birds depend on mangroves, but different living species with a lot of benefit to us. So it's up to us to protect and restore the mangrove forest. Good. Thank you, Peter, for that.
Exactly.
Yeah. And okay, before I read, okay, let me read Elizabeth's question, and then I give an opportunity to Mugwima. I see he's raised up his hand. And Elizabeth Njenga, hi Kagema. Have you tried to reach out to the relevant authorities in the government to have the mangroves conserved?
Oh, Elizabeth, thank you for that question. We are with them every minute, including yesterday. Yesterday, I was talking to the Chief Conservator of Forests, talking about the same story yesterday. And we even had the permanent secretary, I think, in the Ministry of Environment. Everybody in KFS was in the meeting. It's a lot of talk and probably very little action. We agree many things. We go to the offices many times. Now we have every county has a mangrove management committee. Kilifi should be having their meeting anytime, but probably we will have ticked a box that the meeting happened. The outcome is another story. What I see generally is not about mangrove. The commitment to conserve our natural environment, our natural forest, whether mangrove or terrestrial, is quite low across the board. And this is the worst part of it is we have officers who have jobs. They after the salary and benefit they get, they have zero commitment to the environment, to the jobs they have. And this is the worst indictment that I can give to our officers in different departments, whether KFS, KWS. And that's now what takes us back to the communities. Because talking we have, sometimes we arrest using community scouts, and then KFS gets something, they are bribed, and then they release the goods to the poacher. So this is disheartening, but we are unlikely to stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the response to Elizabeth's question. I will give this chance to Mugwima to ask his question. Mugwima, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It transports me back to my experience in architecture, in looking at the vernacular architecture of the coast. So the question is, are there other countries, perhaps along the coast, where along the East African coast, where mangroves also grow, that are successful in conserving those forests sustainably, such that the community can also benefit? Because I see the problem we have in some of these areas is because this material has been used for centuries for trade and for construction of their buildings. Indeed, this UNESCO protected site of Lamu, a lot of it is mangrove. So the question is, are there other countries that we can learn from where this is successful, such that the residents are able to harvest, yet they are able to conserve at the same time, because they are the custodians of this natural heritage? The next one is this. In Kenya, do we have private persons on their private land growing their own mangroves? Do we have private forests? And is it possible?
Private mangrove forests.
Yes, growing their own private mangrove forests. Is this happening? Otherwise, thank you very
maybe
much.
I start with the last question, the second question. Mangroves only grow in the intertidal zone between the high water mark and the low water mark, and that is government land. Anywhere, wherever there is a water body, is public space. So you cannot have a private mangrove forest unless now you pump the marine water from the ocean into your land somewhere, maybe a private swamp, and then plant mangroves there. But the way things are now, you can only find mangroves in public space.
I'm asking about those whose land extends to those riparian areas. Because you could have people whose land extends to that riparian zone where they can naturally grow.
I saw such an example, and actually this guy is our Nature Kenya's lawyer or advocate in Malindi. He's a large neighbor, Sabaki and the ocean there. the river moved away and a lot of space was left. He actually did plant. He spent about 20 million shillings, Kenya money, to plant mangroves, about 6 or 7 acres. And the mangroves did well. But when they were big enough to be poles, people just cut and said, this is public space. Although it is neighboring their land, it is public space, because even if the river recedes or moves away, it's very hard to justify that where the river used to be is now private land. And this is an area of contestation legally, because in Malindi, especially north of Malindi, we have about 2 kilometers of land where the sea moved away. Whose land is that? And we don't have a policy on that kind of land. So we contest, people go to court and argue and counter arguments and things like that. So it is not very clear that you can possess land where mangrove can naturally grow. It's public space. But you hear that there is some gaps in law and policy that needs to be filled about that. On success cases of mangroves in the Western Indian Ocean region, that is the Eastern, the East Indian Ocean area from Somalia through Kenya, Tanzania, Morocco, Comoros, and Madagascar, and Mozambique. Those countries seem to suffer the same. We are also in the forums of the Western Indian Ocean. A lot of mangroves are in Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique, a bit of it in Madagascar, but the same challenges are cutting across. Poverty, poverty, poverty. When you go to Tanzania, those Rufiji deltas and all the other rivers that empty the Indian Ocean, there are a lot of mangrove areas, but the same problems seem to be there. But there is a presentation that I saw some times ago, and this needs to be looked into seriously, that there is a variety of rice that can grow in mangrove areas, in those salty waters, that is being tried in Tanzania. If that can happen, and mangroves grow with the rice, then of course, the farmers will do like the Paris we have in Kenya, growing trees in the degraded areas and grow crops at the same time, and the farmers will be responsible. So, but as things stand, we don't have very good examples where we can go and learn. We are facing the same challenges of urbanization, high population density in mangrove areas across the Eastern Africa area. And when you look at globally, wherever mangroves are, then you see high populations, whether it's Indonesia, it's the Philippines, whether it's Mexico, and all those areas in the tropics. It's like tropics are synonymous with poverty. I don't know why. Wherever we are within the tropics, then especially along the equator, then you find poverty along there. I don't know whether there is any correlation between equator and poverty. And this is very sad, because also if you look the same belt, most of the global biodiversity is there. So most of the forests, including the Amazons, the Congos and others, are in the same region. The mangroves are also there. The poverty is there. And at the end of everything, then we are losing important biodiversity, and we are losing ecosystem services. And the whole world is complaining because of that, although not enough resources have been assigned to taking care of the forests, including the mangroves in the tropics. Thank you. I don't know whether I've answered your question.
Yes, you have. Thanks a lot, Francis, for that clarification. Asante.
Yeah, karibu.
Okay, thank you. See, we still have some few minutes to go. Okay, Heather from Heather Elkins in the chat box. Hi, Heather. Okay, today is International Day for Conservation of Mangrove Ecosystem. I think the sentence is not complete because she mentioned something on today's Daily Nation has a large, okay, it's not complete. Maybe Heather, if you can still repress it and resend again, we'll be able to pass the message to the speaker.
Richard, can you hear me?
Yes, Heather, we can hear you.
I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Yeah,
I don't know
ask
what
the
happened to the
question,
end of
Robert.
that.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Francis if he'd had anything to do with the insert in the Daily Nation and whether it was really worthwhile. Perhaps people should read it and it should be promoted.
I've not even seen it. For your example, I'm coming from the national celebrations somewhere in Kwale near Vanga, where the national celebration is happening. Maybe it's not ended yet. I had to come out of there because of the network. I have not seen the content of the newspaper today. Actually, I have not seen the newspaper.
Or is it
And
the same what Peter Njeru has shared about? Okay, there's another comment just below here, and maybe Njeru, I can give you this opportunity. Maybe just summarize, because I think it could be the same. Because you are also mentioning something on today's Daily Nation paper.
yeah, Jero, say something.
Where is he?
Yeah, there he is. Njeru, go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much, Richard, and thanks, Kagema, for sharing the experiences and Nature Kenya works at the coast. I had a comment or more of a question in the chat box. I think with the many EIAs on proposed developments that are not compatible with the biodiversity conservation, for sure, mangroves and other associated species along the coastline, which we know is ecologically sensitive areas, are under threat. Now, on today's Daily Nation, I know you come across this perhaps later. It means that Raila company in a plan to build shillings 500 million luxury hotel in Kilifi, and this is 100 meters from the shoreline. So my concern is, are these threats ending anytime soon? And what is the one thing that you would say can be done to end these recurring proposed projects that are not compatible with conservation? Yeah, I know you are very passionate about these issues and the threats they cause, but I know, yeah, these things come and go. We fight this one, another one comes in. After that, another one comes in. Do you still have the energy to, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Peter, this is the sad part of this. And sometimes I say, Kenya is not a small country. We have a lot of land. And I cannot see any clear justification why we have to push the ocean to develop either the ocean, the hotel or anything else. People can walk to the beaches from the hotel, which could be 200, 300 meters away or 500 meters away. But everybody want to see the ocean from their hotel rooms. I don't know what benefit this brings. Just seeing the ocean, even most of the time you are in your room, it is at night. So why do you want to see the ocean during the night? It is just crazy. And I think it's our mindset, which is crazy. But having said that, these developments are not going to stop. In fact, they are going to increase. If I talk about the 25 years I've been living here at the coast, when I came here, it was different. The pressures were higher, were lower. Now they are growing. And you guys in Nairobi, you want to holiday homes here. You want to, once you have some money, some corner somewhere, you want a holiday home next to the beach or next to some mangrove. But I think the fights, we are going to continue fighting. Probably when I get too old, somebody else will take over and we continue. We can only do our best, maybe not solve the entire problem. But also, if we are successful in one case, many people are discouraged. And I think we need to save money for going to court, because courts can delay projects for a long time. And some people give up if the project is delayed. So this is something that is not going to reduce, it's going to increase. And also we lack like development plans. If we had a plan which is enforceable and it's enforced, and in Kenya, we know we don't enforce anything. People, the development of certain things in a certain place, and all countries set aside conservation areas and they are protected and people respect that. But that doesn't happen, not only in Kenya, most of African countries. I don't know why. And then we complain later on, there's a tsunami. I'm seeing now developers building beach walls costing hundreds of millions when they could have let the nature protect them. They didn't do that. Now they have to build walls. And those walls, the government allows them to be built. It's very sad. So I don't want to overemphasize this, but I'm fighting on, Peter. I'm not giving up yet. I believe in the last man standing, and I must be that man standing at the end.
Thank you. Thank you for the response, Kagema, on that. And also, thank you very much, Peter and Jeru, for sharing this insight. I actually see that you've shared part of the article through the chat box, so maybe the participant can have a look. Okay, so maybe any other person with a question before we bring the session to a close? Elizabeth Jenga has said all the best, Kagema.
Thank you, Elizabeth. You should join me when we are fighting. There is always a fight almost every month. So if you come here, there will be a fight, you can join in.
Okay.
Any other question?
Oh, I've seen this about the EIAs. These EIAs have, Peter, EIAs have become like a procedural thing. Every EIA which is proposed a project by a senior person goes through. Or maybe with the politics, if there is one for somebody like Raila, probably will be denied because of the politics. But the norm is senior people have all sorts of projects. Most of them are not very friendly. And you remember there was a president, the current president had a hotel somewhere. It was a big controversy about the building of a beach wall somewhere in Mombasa. And it keeps happening. I remember there is an old case, by the way. I was taken to court over Mangrove area in Mida Creek back in 2006 by a developer, and that matter is still pending in court. So maybe you'll see my WhatsApp group to fundraise for the case if it comes again. But it has been dormant for years now, but the matter is still in court because I talked to KWS, I told them somebody is grabbing part of Mida Creek. And they said that the word grabbing is defamatory. And for that reason, they went to court. That's intimidation. And finally, the land was taken and the building was put up. These are the sad realities.
Oh, it's quite sad though. Okay, Dave Hilliard, it seems that this is all about working against nature rather than working in harmony with it. When will they learn? So,
Never.
no.
Actually, a lot of people don't care about nature. We have been vilified, insulted. We called the enemies of development by a lot of people. That Nature Kenya and several other organizations are opposed to projects that bring jobs, that bring wealth. We want people to, in our area where we were not born, to remain poor. I've been accused of all sorts of things, but I've stood my ground, and that ground I think is permanent. It's not something that I'm going to shift. Yeah, sometimes threatened, but I think now I've developed very thick skin, so I don't listen to threats anymore.
All the best, and yeah, and also Dave Hilliard is saying thank you, Francis, for all your hard work. Okay,
There's a problem with your voice.
you can't hear me. No, I was just adding that Dave
You are
Hilliard,
back. You're okay now.
yes, Dave Hilliard has said all the best for all your hard work. Thank you, Francis, for all your hard work. They need to replace the word nature. They need to replace the word nature with the word our home or our mother. Thank you very much for that input. So
Maybe we need
yeah.
we need we need stronger phrases now.
Okay, and Joshua says, thanks Kagema for the presentation and the efforts you're putting towards conservation in the coast. Do not tire, keep the fire burning.
Yeah, I hope the fire will burn somebody.
And Rupi saying, Francis, you really nice hearing. Thank you very much. Margaret, you have something to say before we bring the session?
It's more just to say that I think, Francis, don't give up, because I think the world is suddenly sitting up and realizing that we can't go against nature. You look at all the forest fires burning here. I'm talking from Canada. You look about our coastal regions. We just had some very, very bad storms. So really, nature's starting to say, you can't keep pushing me anymore. You know, and we've been doing it over and over and over again. And I think in Kenya, you believe that we in the West are better at looking after our resources, and that's not true. Money pushes and people don't pay attention, but finally, nature's pushing back. So I think that eventually it's going to cost all of these people, and that's when they sit up and suddenly become conservators of nature. So don't give up. Where we really respect all the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So that's encouraging. We'll keep fighting. It's also sad that humanity have forgotten that we need nature. It doesn't need us. If we all die today, the world will continue. It is us who need nature. And we need to remind ourselves every morning. Everybody needs to have something written next to their beds that we need nature. And read every morning and remind yourself before you are driven to extinction by our own stupidity. Sorry for the word stupidity, but I think that's what we are practicing.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll just go through the contents. Some of the comments that have come in on about two of them. From Brian Otiego, congratulations, Francis. That thick skin is what Fight for Nature deserve. Keep up with the spirit. And yeah, Teresi.
Thank you, Atieno.
Yes, there's one from Teresia Mungai. I have learned a lot from this talk. Yes, thank you. Here to support restoration and conservation in the coast. Sante sana. So,
thank you, Teresia.
Yeah, to close with, there's a direct message that has come from Caroline Chebet. And here is what she has to say. Like, with many EIAs on upcoming developments across mangrove areas are a big threat to mangrove conservation areas. Recurring developments, no clear justification to the developments are not going to stop. They are going to increase. A rush for land for holiday homes. This isn't something going to reduce. We also lack development plans to set aside conservation areas and development areas. Every EIA almost goes through. Most projects are not very friendly. Thank you very much, Caroline, for your comment and input in there. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are right in time to bring the session to an end. And thank you very much for your time, for joining us virtually this afternoon. And maybe I'll just give Francis a minute to give us a closing remark, as we also thank him for the insightful presentation that he has done. Kagema.
Yeah. So everyone who was listening, thank you for listening to me. And most importantly, do something about nature wherever you are. Those in Kenya, especially you guys in big cities and towns, do something. And I believe it's not all lost. There's something that can be done.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate. Thank you very much, everyone.
We have seen restoration efforts. What we can think about it. Thank you so much. Let's talk again, but more, let's do something.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I wish all of you a nice, evening ahead, and thank you very much for joining us. We can now leave at our own pleasure. Thank you very much.